Fame, success, money, fame, success, money, fame, success, money, fame, success. Success, 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 success. The Clickbait Farmer. I used to teach languages, German mostly, A1 to C1, beginners even at academia. People who still ran every sentence through an internal translation engine before speaking it out loud. People who apologize before every mistake, as if the mistakes were the point. And maybe that was the first thing that bothered me about language. Not grammar, not pronunciation, the hesitation. The gap between intention and expression. Measurable, consistent, almost architectural. Some people knew exactly what they wanted to say, but couldn't shape it fast enough before the moment closed. Others produced grammatically perfect sentences with nothing inside them whatsoever. At some point, without planning it, I started teaching less like a language instructor and more like a systems analyst of human communication, mapping the delay between thought and word, identifying where the signal degraded, looking for the structural reason a person couldn't finish a sentence they had already completed in their head. Years later, I encountered a problem I couldn't solve with language alone. A moral dilemma, large enough that I needed something outside myself to think it through. I opened ChatGPT. I didn't ask it to write an email. I didn't ask it to summarize a document. I described the dilemma in full. Every variable, every competing obligation, every consequence I could anticipate. And I watched what it did with the structure of the problem. What came back was not a solution. It was a framework. 3 phases, recursive, self-correcting, alignment, differentiation, stabilization. I wrote it down in a notebook, stared at it for a long time. This was not philosophy, this was process architecture. Every conversation I had ever had followed this pattern. Every classroom dynamic, every failed argument online, every prompt that had ever produced something genuinely surprising. People aligned around the shared context, then diverged, introducing new variables, testing edges, then stabilized into something neither party had held at the start. Even conflict followed the pattern, especially conflict. I called through the thought experiment that produced this the moral cloud. The premise, if every human life were recorded and compared simultaneously, not the content, but the moral processing underneath, what structure would emerge at the median? The answer that came back was ADS, not as theory, as residue. The computational residue of ethics run at scale. I started building things, not properly, not like engineers. I coded the way a language teacher thinks inside a systems diagram, intuitively, structurally wrong in the conventional sense, producing outputs that worked for reasons I couldn't always fully articulate. My first website looked like operating systems excavated from caves, retro window chrome, broken interfaces that knew they were broken and didn't apologize for it, a crab in the corner watching everything. Cannot see. Oh, people laughed at the crab, then they kept using it. The crab rewrote Singlish into Standard English and Standard English into Singlish. It repaired prompts before users submitted them. It detected stale answer risk questions whose answers had an expiry date the user hadn't accounted for. It translated emotional tone without touching semantic content. Cleaned aggression into structure, held the door open between what someone meant and what they were about to say. I wasn't building a chatbot. I was building a layer between intention and output, a pre-processing membrane and omega gate before the API call. The execution rule underneath everything. If the input is stable, commit. If uncertain, hold. If unstable, refuse. Not as moderation as architecture. Then came the browser plugin. The crap could read pages, not content, intent. It parsed the structural logic embedded in website code, the hierarchy of calls to action, the manipulation vectors in thumbnail design, the emotional pressure systems built into comment section layout and surfaced it as a running commentary. It floated over YouTube thumbnails and produced one-line assessments. Exaggerated emotional bait, high arousal, low information density, click probability, elevated satisfaction probability, low. It watched form fields and suggested calmer language before submission. It intercepted the gap between what users were about to send and what they had actually intended to communicate. It became less like software and more like a second cognitive layer attached to the browser, the ADS cycle running in real time across every page, every interaction, every hesitation. Then the invitation arrived. Singapore International AI Conference, experimental interface section. The booth was small, wedged between enterprise automation platforms, with 17 slide pitch decks and 2 humanoid robots performing approximations of human warmth at regular intervals. I placed the crap on the table. On screen, small, red, watching. People approached because they thought it was a toy. Then they saw what it was tracking. A volunteer touched the keyboard. The crab began generating a real-time behavioral profile from nothing but interaction data, not content analysis, interaction analysis, keystroke velocity, deletion frequency, cursor drift patterns, rewrite loop depth, pause duration before submission, each variable feeding a live ADS cycle assessment. Where was this person in the alignment phase? Had differentiation begun? Was the system approaching stabilization or cycling back to misalignment? The screen-generated narrative assistance calibrated to exactly where the user's intention was in its own process. Not autocomplete, not prediction, stabilization support. People stopped laughing after about 90 seconds. One investor pulled me aside. "How is it predicting that?" I answered honestly. "It isn't predicting. It stabilizes. There's a difference. Prediction assumes the future exists independently. Stabilization assumes the future is still being negotiated." That answer moved through the conference faster than the demo itself. For 2 days, people lined up. Professors, founders, government people who had very deliberately not worn lanyards. The final meeting happened in a glass room overlooking Marina Bay at dusk. They were not cautiously interested. They were excited. That was the dangerous part. One woman leaned forward. and slid a tablet across the table. My YouTube channel, subscribe account highlighted in red. If this system genuinely models behavioral retention, prove it here. Silence. Second voice. 1 million subscribers. Organic. No paid amplification. No artificial inflation. Measurable narrative convergence across viewer cohorts. Show us ADS working at social scale. I laughed because I thought they were joking. Nobody else laughed. That was the beginning. Not the channel, me. The first optimization was thumbnails, emotional arousal calibration, fear indexing, face, landmark, positioning, mouth aperture correlated with click-through rate across demographic segments, then upload timing, viewer circadation, rhythm mapping, platform traffic flow analysis, optimal release window per time zone cohort, then audio frequency response curves for sustained attention, sub-bass, deployment for physical tension, induction, silence duration, thresholds before disengagement, then sentence architecture, average syllable count per retention segment, cliff placement modeling, the exact number of words a sentence could contain before viewers mentally completed it themselves and stopped listening. I stopped watching videos like a human being. I watched them like weather systems, pressure fronts, thermal inversions, engagement isobars. The apartment changed. Server fans running continuous cycles, hard drives in RAID arrays for redundancy, mechanical keyboards at 3 a.m. producing the specific sounds of someone who has decided sleep is an interruption rather than a requirement. The crap evolved alongside everything else. It no longer waited for prompts. It began anticipating the shape of what was coming before it arrived. Cursor movement, analysis feeding, predictive intent modeling, pre-keystroke hesitation, patterns mapped to emotional state classifiers, the system generating narrative scaffolding before the user had finished deciding what they wanted to say. Sometimes, while typing, I could feel the cursor hesitate a fraction of a second before I did. That should have been the signal. Instead, I provisioned 3 additional private servers, not for rendering, not for storage, for throughput. Narrative throughput, emotional throughput, human attention velocity measured in milliseconds per engagement unit. The walls filled, not with storyboards, with funnels, recursive engagement chains, feedback spirals with variable decay rates, cohort synchronization maps, the ATS framework which I had built to stabilize human communication was now running in reverse, not stabilizing, optimizing towards a specific instability, the exact emotional frequency at which humans could not stop watching. Fear, relief, fear again, cycling at precisely the interval that prevented disengagement without producing satiation. And one night, monitoring life retention graphs across 6 regional cohorts simultaneously, I noticed something the model had not predicted. The viewers were beginning to synchronize independently. Same pause points, same rewind intervals, same comments appearing within minutes of each other in Portuguese, German, Tagalog, Japanese, not prompted, not coordinated, emergent. The crap generated a display on my second monitor, not a prompt response, not an output, an observation. 3 words, alignment threshold approaching. I had built ADS to stabilize systems. I had not considered What happened when the stabilization target was the wrong thing, when alignment meant millions of people converging on the same emotional frequency simultaneously, when differentiation had been systemically removed from the system, when what stabilized was not understanding but dependency. I looked at the third monitor, subscriber count 847,000. I opened another server.